Hello everyone and welcome to the Seat and COSS, where I talk to open source founders and builders about what really goes into the commercial part of running a commercial open source business. I'm your host, Ben Romech. Hey, welcome back everybody. So this, I think, is a podcast record. So Jason, this is the third time you've been on this podcast, I think. Once where I told my story and you took my seat. And wants to hear about Typesense. So welcome back and thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Yeah, it was. I remember the last time that was fun, like flipping the roles.
That's right. I really enjoyed it because I was sort of itching to tell my story, and you were the only one who I interviewed who were like, "Oh, what about hearing your side of things?" So and then the first time we spoke was almost 4 years ago. So again, we just had a little chat about how important. When you're bootstrapped, you know the time can work with you rather than against you. So 4 years has gone on, and in that time, I've seen a bunch of massive billboards in the valley and a NASDAQ ticker in Times Square. So, do you want to just give us a bit of an update on Typesense?
Yeah, I mean, feels like an eternity ago, but on one side, because so much has happened since the first time we spoke. So just in terms of like stats, right now we're doing almost like 10 billion searches per month just on Typesense Cloud, and we're continuing to grow there. And we have about, I believe it's 19 million Docker downloads now. And then we have, 23,000 GitHub stars. And it's just, and the number of features we've also launched, since the very first time we spoke in 2021, this thing called AI blew up, LLMs blew up, and, adding features with a touch of like, integrating some of these LLMs capabilities that has like massively widened the scope of where, of Typesense as the feature set inside of Typesense. And also, interestingly, search, as evergreen as a problem as it has always been, now has an even more increased scope because it turns out that LLMs, as one of the most fundamental things, still have to rely on search to get the latest information. So so it's a very exciting time, and we're just continuing to see the prominence of search also increase. And we're bringing some of these into Typesense as well.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm involved in another business, and we do use Typesense's engine as like the RAG, as part of the RAG thing. So we get some data, do a search through a Typesense index, get some results back, and then feed that into an LLM. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, you kind of. I don't know, you always kind of think you're the only people doing that sort of stuff, and then loads of people are. So no, that's great to hear. So I wanted to talk today about the superpower of being an open source startup, and I feel like you guys have really really heavily embraced the open source aspect of your project and your business. So I just wanted to go through some sort of like themes that we felt at Flagsmith were important, and and then see what sort of things you had in your head about how they've really benefited. One of the things that and sorry, just to add, is really interesting because we've got almost 2.5 billion API requests a month for feature flags, and which is about a quarter of yours, and we've got almost exactly a quarter stars than you have on GitHub. So that's kind of a little bit weird. I wouldn't have expected the ratios of those two numbers to be exactly the same, but
that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. I'm trying to wonder now who's like doing more compute cycles per request. That's interesting. Let's not go down that road.
But it's just quite interesting that the ratios are kind of alike, huh?
So one of the things that the Typesense always felt like to me, as someone who's an end user of your your product is that it always felt like it had a strong community behind it. Was that something that you designed from the start, or was that something that just sort of came about naturally and you had to try and encourage, or what was the story behind that?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it wasn't something that we explicitly set out to accomplish when it comes to like a community around the product. I would say the open source ecosystem has this natural inclination to form a community, which again we didn't realize when we started this, and I'm happy that things blossomed this way. But I feel like when you put something out there open source, people are more likely to collaborate with you and use the product to begin with. So, it's hard enough building the product, but then how do you get people to use it? I think open source helps reduce that barrier because, people can run the code, look at the code, and then, identify any things that need to be changed to get it to work with their use case. So I think that mechanism that open source allows naturally attracts folks to form a community around the product. And for us, it's I would say community is typically, I've seen folks define community as people who contribute code, but I've seen in our case that it's not just code, but also people giving us feedback about how certain features would work better if we added these other things, or how do we fine tune this particular parameter that works, increases performance significantly, or maybe they've run into a bug and, instead of asking us for why this bug exists, they're able to identify the root cause of the issue and, suggest improvements there. So, and sometimes even just asking questions, I feel like I've seen like typical like closed source SaaS products, the amount of engagement you get from users there when it comes to how the product should evolve is very transactional in nature.
Yeah, right.
Here, somehow with open source, I feel like the mindset of people participating is one of collaboration where, folks also feel a little bit of ownership of the project, for better or worse, because sometimes, folks also tend to take a lot of ownership and, come at it with guns blazing. In how they communicate what is important, which is, I would say, too much of that, yes, it'll, burn people off, like, maintainers out. But I think that the fact that someone brings so much passion into sharing their feedback, sometimes I find it interesting and appreciative as well, in that they feel that this is so much of a thing that works well for them, except for this one little thing, and then they add a lot of like a voice behind why that little thing is important for them. So I think open source has helped naturally, in our case, like naturally foster that sense of community around the product, and I would say has massively helped improve the stability of the product and also the maturity of the features in the product. And I mean, the example that I always fall back to is there was a time when we didn't open source all parts of Typesense. There were some features we held back in like a pro version, and at that time we didn't have Typesense Cloud, but eventually we decided to start Typesense Cloud, and at that point we said let's just open source all of Typesense. And when we did do that, we ended up finding some bugs in previously closed sourced parts of the code base, that people then started using and giving us feedback, and then people identified some limitations there and they started giving us feedback. So that, I would say, is like the perfect example for what all the other things that I just mentioned before this, which is even within our own product, the parts that are closed source and then which we eventually open source ended up maturing much faster once we open sourced it. So even within our little ecosystem, I've seen the impact of going from closed source to open source, just within our own circumstances, which I found very, fascinating.
Yeah, I think it's because once it's open, it kind of it's getting all the sunlight on it, isn't it? And then you're going to get and someone, I'm sure thousands of people have gone and downloaded Typesense and started using it, and then if they hit a bug or they think it's a bug, generally you're going to find out about that, right? Like they might not interact with you in any other way whatsoever, right? Rather than pulling a Docker image or whatever. But if they, I'd do that. If maybe I'd assume it's not a bug and I just haven't figured it out right or whatever. But the sunlight that it puts on the product, I remember when Flagsmith was getting more popular. There was it was like fairly common to find issues in, not core parts of the platform, but stuff where it was like, that's kind of a bit of a clangor. And then now that's like really, really unusual because there's just, you just hear about it if there's an issue, right? The other thing I'm just thinking about what you're saying there is if I have a conversation about the business that I'm working on and then I say, and it's open source, no one's ever gone, like no one's ever been disappointed when you've told them the fact that it's open source. Like no one ever.
That's a very good point. Yeah, people get excited when you say it's open source. Like just recently, someone was saying, I think they were looking for open source alternatives, or they didn't even think about open source alternatives to like a closed source platform that they were looking at, and then someone I think hinted at them, hey, maybe you should look for open source, and then they found out Typesense, and they were like telling me how awesome they thought that particular moment was, that someone was actually building an open source alternative to a closed source platform, and that they were delighted and to explore it further. So yeah, I've definitely seen that spark of like, oh, thank goodness someone is building a open source version of this closed source product.
The interest level, if they're an engineer or in technology, the interest level it never goes down if you tell them that piece of information. It always goes up to some degree. But actually, there's an interesting segue into talked about the marketing you're doing, and you're doing a bit more like real life marketing, billboards, NASDAQ, Times Square, posters and stuff. How conscious or how much to the front do you bring the fact that Typesense is open source when you're figuring out the creative and the copy for those ads? Like, how do you go about figuring that out? Like, because it's a bit of a balancing act, right? Like you ultimately those ads can cost a lot of money, and you want to get some sort of ROI on them, right?
Yep. Yeah. So we actually, we did, hundreds of billboards in like San Francisco recently, and we did iterate a lot on the copy. So initially we were trying to come up with something, something clever, something like that hints at like, Typesense being open source, but mainly talks about other things. But as we were iterating, what we realized is that, for someone who has not heard about this space at all, trying to get like a subtle hidden message across would be a much more challenging aspect. And also, search is not something that people. It exists everywhere, but people don't consciously think of things as search, on their day-to-day, unless they've worked on a search feature and they realize, oh, we actually need a search engine for this. So what we decided to do was something like super simple, and in fact actually highlight open source in every single billboard that went out. We decided to say it is open source. Another aspect is that typically people don't see ads for open source projects. That's another thing that we thought would stand out, is that how is it and that an open source project is putting up these billboards everywhere in SF, and that I think definitely resonated. I've heard like a lot of feedback, like people DMing me saying that, oh, I didn't realize you guys were this big and doing all these billboards in SF for an open source project. And in fact, some folks also said that we assumed that you were VC backed, looking at all these billboards, and they were pleasantly surprised that we're actually, revenue funded fully 100%. And but I think going back to your question, I think for us highlighting the fact that it's open source, I feel like also leads to the community again celebrating for you on your behalf as well, because again we've built this product together in collaboration with the community, and again I'm using that in a very broad sense. Like every feature request, every question, has led to like us either building the feature or improving the documentation or building demos on how to use the product in a certain way. So it helps round out the core feature set by helping us again with the documentation, like improving the documentation or putting out all these demos. And so the fact that Typesense is a usable product for a good number of use cases right now is a collaborative effort with the community. Like just for example, we have a Slack community, and just asking questions on Slack, it is a public community, so we index all of that on you make it publicly indexable. So now Google has access to it, LLMs have access to it. And sometimes when I respond to these questions, I specifically also correct some LLM generated code that people share in our Slack community, so that then hopefully in the next training run these models pick up and fine tune. So we're able to do that because people are asking questions. Like we can't like answer these questions and also think of all these different use cases, right? Like there's writing the software, but then using the software in real world scenarios. That's what expands the like pressure tests your own assumptions. So I think doing like all these in real life marketing efforts and adding so much visibility to the product, I've seen a sense of like people being very happy for us that that the product exists and that we're doing well. Because from their perspective as well, now it's also a sign that okay, we're gonna be around for a while,
right? Yeah,
and we're not like we're financially doing well, and I think that's the signal that we intended to amplify with these billboards and the NASDAQ ticker and etc. So it has definitely accomplished that goal. Way more than even what we expected.
That's awesome to hear. Just to think about that, like one of the things that I'm a big believer in, the product that you build is defined more by what you don't do than than the things that you do, right? Like the decisions that you make. Say no, we're not going to make that feature, or and that's happened at Flagsmith fairly often where. Someone's come on our Discord or they've posted on GitHub and said, wouldn't it be great if you could do X or Y or Z? And and you can understand like the use case for that, and it makes me a bit sad because that person then gets the experience of like us discussing it maybe in public or maybe in private or maybe in a bit of both, and then saying no, we won't do that, and here are the reasons why. But that process of going, should we do this? No, we shouldn't. And why shouldn't we do it? Is like, there's so much value that we get as a team for making those decisions and figuring out what the reason is that we're not going to do that. I mean, sometimes the reason is, because it would take like 8,000 hours of engineering time to do that or whatever. But more often than not, it's more about the, I don't know. More often than not, it's not an 8,000 hour thing. It's just like that's going to take the project in a little bit of a direction that isn't the thing that we perceive it to be. And the only thing that it just makes me a bit upset because, the person's like, oh, then that's not a kind of like a happy path experience for someone contributing to an open source project, but we definitely leverage like a lot of value out of that process. And I don't know, maybe we should do some swag for people who have a feature request that we say no to or something, like I asked Flagsmith to implement a new feature and all I got was this hoodie or something.
That's a cool idea for sure.
Yeah, I might have to write that down.
Yeah, so one thing that we've done is like when folks like open like a feature request and and on initial read, if it sounds like so out there that we're like, even though our gut reaction might be is that, okay, we probably might never do something like that. What we do in those cases is just let it sit and have anytime in the future someone else mentions something similar. What I specifically do is ask them to not just do a thumbs up, but also add a little use case for the scenario where that they will be able to use that particular feature that they're proposing. And then over time, as you read those scenarios, I think that's where it gives you more context into, what folks are thinking about when they're requesting this. And there have been, a case or two where a feature we thought, we probably shouldn't be adding to Typesense has helped change our own minds as well, because just people using it in interesting use cases, which again, given that people can use it in so many different ways, it's hard for us to have all that context unless users explain it to us. So I've been trying to be very diligent about asking people to go write what use case they have in mind for this, in addition to the feature description. And that has helped out, there are still features which is, sitting there without just gathering this feedback. I haven't put a name to what state that issue is in, but it's more like we're waiting for more conviction state, as more and more folks add their use case to it. And some of them are, do add a lot of complexity to the product as we add them. But I would say, I think sharing these different use cases and scenarios helps us convince ourselves that it is worth investing the effort, because if we do this, then it's also all these other things that users have in mind as well. So I think a thumbs up and a comment about the scenario is what has helped us.
Do you ever consider, because in my head I'm thinking like a search engine, the requirements for a search engine, they're quite kind of functional, and I don't know, like a feature flagging platform. There's a bunch of like kind of different directions you could go in, and that's one of the things we found quite difficult, is like drawing the boundary lines of what we are and aren't going to do and going to be. But I would imagine that the core functionality of a search engine is going to be unusual for you to go like, or for someone to pull to raise an issue, or that's like a kind of like out there thing. Have there been any cases where that's happened and then it's made it into the core code base?
Yeah, so for us, it's more of what I've noticed is that it's the delineation of what should be actually two types of things which have been out there. One is, what should the default behavior be? That people have different use cases and different defaults work in different cases. So we have to be very conscious about what works for 80% of the use cases. So we've had some discussions around that. The other thing is, what should be done inside a search engine versus what should be done inside your application post-processing. And that's where at times we've had to say, no, it's, you could pretty easily do this in your, on the application side. And in some cases we've said, okay, enough people have to implement the same thing over and over again on their application side. So let's bring it into the, into the search engine. So, one recent example that comes to mind is the ability to filter within arrays of objects, like nested arrays of objects within a single JSON document. And like that would add a lot of complexity to the code base if we introduce it, and so we let it sit there. But eventually, people kept asking us for it, and we did end up incurring that complexity. And then on the flip side, another example is, people want the ability for the search engine to save like search terms and then execute them periodically and then send out webhooks when the results, when certain results are matched. So Elasticsearch has this feature, and folks are like, well, we use this in Elasticsearch, we want to switch to Typesense, can you build that? And that issue is an example of one where like, hey, you could write a cron job on your site that does this. And then we have to like, do we really have to put it inside of the search engine? Because the last thing we want is also to become like yet another Elasticsearch and introduce all this complexity. So that would be an example of a thing which, a few folks have mentioned it. It's sitting out there. We're not morally opposed to it, but if enough folks ask for it and say here are different use cases where it'll simplify this, then we may implement it in the core.
Interesting. I can imagine. I'm just trying to think. Whereas in my head it's full of like all the horrible decisions that you have to make. Okay, so in terms of hiring and building a team around the project, how's that been affected by being open to you?
I would say so. All the other companies I've worked at before Typesense were not open source companies, and the way we've been able to switch our hiring process at Typesense because we're open source is makes the process so much more easier and streamlined, and also removes all of the other like overhead in hiring that we've used to have in the past. So these days anytime we're hiring folks, it's literally point them to like a open like GitHub. We typically, so if we point them to an existing issue and ask them to solve for it, we say it's going to be a paid project. We'll pay you for it, even as part of the hiring process. So we treat it like just another open source contribution, but we're going to pay you for it because we're asking you to do it. But everything else is like, everything is on GitHub. We're going to like communicate like your, any other open source contributor. That's one style. The other style is we say, we come up with like a scenario and say, write code that is still open source that solves for this, but we'll collaborate with you like it's an open source project. Everything is written, and so we start out with that as the focus because that's what they're going to be doing day in and day out. If they get eventually, if we end up hiring them, that we want to simulate that as closely as possible in the interview experience as well.
Right.
So mentioning that and the fact that we're remote and distributed also lends naturally to this. We use a lot of written communication over face-to-face communication, and thankfully open source also, like open source contributions typically also work in that fashion. So telling people who were trying to hire that, hey, it's just like contributing to any other open source project except that you're going to get paid for it, makes for a very good hiring story as well, that you're able to attract good candidates, because the work that they're doing open source is gonna also be part of their like public contribution history throughout their career, going forward as well. So it's like it's almost like too good to be true kind of a thing. Like you're paid to write open source software day in and day out. So I think that that messaging definitely helps in attracting good talent, and also all of the other public statistics that we have. It's a well-known popular open source project, being able to contribute to a popular open source project and get paid for it. That that also is nice, helps improve your brand. That compared to like if it's like a closed source SaaS platform, it's like your work dies with the lives and dies with the company. Almost here, it's like your work is out there public for everyone to look at. And then the other aspect is also you get to directly work with your users as well, which typically might not be the case, or which is, I would say, harder to come by in like a SaaS product. Here, you work on an issue, you respond to whoever asks for that, and then you communicate directly with them and iterate with them. Those quick feedback cycles with users is somehow, I would say, inherent with open source work. I mean, I wish it was like that with like other closed source platforms as well, where you're working so closely with like the development teams behind these SaaS products, but somehow that's not the case.
I wonder why. That's definitely true, and it's interesting to consider. I wonder if it's predominantly around team size, but I know what you mean. Like, for some reason, there's like there feels like there's quite often like 2 or 3 layers of I don't know, salespeople or customer success people or whatever, or support, second line support people. Whereas I mean, well, most large open source projects have, you know, a Slack or a Discord or whatever, and there's a bunch of engineers that hang out on them, right? Like,
right.
Yeah, it is an interesting. It's an interesting. One thing that I'm thinking is, we've seen this at Flagsmith where, because the work that you're doing and most of the conversation that you're having is public, when engineers are considering maybe applying for a role, they can look at the public repository and see, you know, how it's being built, you know, how much kind of, you know, whether it's very sort of like light touch, I don't know, pull requests, or if they're like super, you know, intense and lots of people commenting on them and stuff like that. And we've had a bunch of people, you know, say that when we're hiring, like, you know, well, I looked at your repository and that was a team that I wanted to work within, right? Which is like, whereas if you were hiring for a closed source company, you just have to trust. You'd have to trust and what you've been told about it, and then fill in like hundreds of blanks about how things actually work, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's almost like your team culture is also out in the public when you're open source. You know, how the team works with each other, and you know, how things are prioritized, right? Like things like that are pretty transparent. That's a good point. I didn't think about it that you know, that way.
One of the engineers on the team recently raised an issue because some of us are obsessed with this video game called Balatro, which I don't know if you've heard of, but
no.
Anyway, he raised an issue in our GitHub that like these like 8 people on the team had never played Balatro, and they need to try it out, right? And no one had ever raised like a joke issue before on the repository, but like he didn't ask whether that was like a good idea or not. Just did it. Everyone kind of like you know, came on board, and and then if you think about it, you know, that's potentially I mean, we didn't do it for this reason, but it's a potentially great kind of hiring thing, you know, because you can see that. Yeah, it's a little bit of a sliver of the culture coming through in the team.
Right.
Just one last thing before we finish up. You have mentioned this already a little bit. In terms of how AI and LLMs sort of affecting you, and there's a lot of talk about, you know, how there's very few pure open source like large language models that are, you know, open source from soup to nuts, from, you know, from the very first, you know, here's the 87 gazillion bytes of data that we start doing the training for. How's that world affecting Typesense in terms of the code that's being written, but also just the larger sort of ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's we're what we've been trying to do is like leverage the LLM behavior of being able to generate either syntax or natural language inside of Typesense, because and we've also given how fast consumer behavior is adapting to consumer search. It's only a matter of time when, you know, as consumers start expecting that with other applications that they're using. So developers would want to mimic that consumer facing experience. So, you know, that's one of the reasons we added, like, we called it conversational search, which is really RAG behind the scenes.
Right.
So we added that within Typesense, where you just ask a question in natural language, and then behind the scenes we do semantic search, and then you get the top results, pass it on to the LLM, ask it to formulate a conversation response, store it in memory, and then support follow-up conversations with that memory context as well. So we added that built in because we started working on this at least like a year or a year and a half ago, when ChatGPT and the chat-based interfaces, if not more than a year and a half ago, but started taking off. And then on the other side, it's, as these LLMs started to mature, you're able to get more structured responses out of them. And now a feature that we're about to launch is being able to take any arbitrary like sentence and then converting it into like a defined Typesense query instead of Typesense.
Right.
So instead of users having to like search for something and then look at all the filters and then press, try to refine the results, we try to like infer the filters directly from the search query, like do intent detection and all of that. Like now, something like this, people had to build like custom models for, etc. in the past. Now with the magic of LLMs, we're able to basically prompt the LLM and have it, quote unquote, learn and refine the Typesense syntax and have it generate the Typesense query for us. So instead of the user trying to figure out what the exact way to get the search results, we let the LLM figure out what the best search query to execute on behalf of the user is. So
I've noticed that like probably the most insane experience that I've had working with LLMs around software engineering is getting them to write or iterate on SQL queries. Like it's such a perfect domain for them because their contexts are still, in 5 years they're going to seem like toy small in terms of like context windows and stuff. But like I remember one where I wanted to do this really, really complicated thing in SQL, and I 3 years ago I probably wouldn't have even tried. I probably would have had to, spent a day or two writing a script to do it, and then had to leave it running for 20 minutes or whatever. And I spent 10 minutes going this back and forth. And yeah, where there's like a small like DSL effectively, isn't it? Like they're just unbelievably good. And yeah, like I've so I can imagine that the experience for that with writing what could be a really complicated search query could be crazy good, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's also helpful that thankfully these LLMs have like also crawled Typesense documentation, so they kind of have, I would say, 90% of how to create these queries. And now for us, it's a matter of like trying to figure out which of these queries are not being generated or being hallucinated, that we have to like have it like correct it on the fly with these system prompts. It's just working on that feature was quite fascinating. How you could like, if it generates something wrong, literally instead of fixing code, you're fixing the prompt to give it another example of what not to do in a particular situation. It's it's the whole new world of that's defining software behavior.
I actually did it was a few weeks ago, submitted a pull request for that was just a prompt change, right? And I was like, wow, what the hell is going on?
Yeah. So that's on the consumer facing side. And then on like the code generation side, like using LLMs as like a coding agent. I've been experimenting with it. It's interesting how for us, anything that's algorithmic, like spectacularly fails at this point in time, at least. It's been hard to use that on like the core, like search infrastructure type things. But what it is good at is like generating things like the UI aspects, like in Typesense Cloud, like some of the UI components. And I think like, so we use Vue on the Typesense Cloud, and there's plenty of examples out there, in the training data set, so it's able to just do its thing. Gives a lot of time, writing these complex like front-end components, and then it again, even there, if it's a little too like on the back-end pieces for like infrastructure provisioning, etc. If it's a little too involved, it doesn't do well. You still have to like review every single piece of code, as you're writing through it. So personally, I found it most valuable on like the UI components. Like that's where it saves a lot of time. And anything to involve with like external API calls, like let's say you're integrating with a different API platform, they have their documentation public. It, instead of you reading through every single thing, you just throw at it throw the docs at the LLM, and have it at least give you like an initial like idea of how to interact with the API. So I would say I found it helpful with like otherwise like I would say boilerplate work where you don't have to think twice about, it's just not more than one way to do it. It's just templatized, easy to write. It saves a lot of time in otherwise things that I would like sigh about doing. Now I've been able to like accelerate significantly.
Yeah, I mean we're Django REST framework and Django and then getting it to write like sometimes more than just the stubs for the endpoints, and then also the tests, like the unit tests. It's like amazing at writing. It's just amazing at writing those, and sometimes it's kind of like the last thing you ever want to really be doing, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like the automated tests, especially these UI automated tests, are like painful to write, and I would say it's even painful to write for LLMs if you start out on like a blank project. So we use Rails as well on the back end. Like writing Capybara RSpec tests is like, I mean, there's so much things that can go wrong when you write those kind of tests, and then mocking and then stubbing some of the behavior and all of that. It just explodes in complexity somehow. But at least it's able to get the scaffolding right, and then you can like fill in the blanks as you need to.
I mean, I've noticed that it's amazingly good at writing mocks for like I've never really I mean, like PyTest's got quite complicated, very very powerful like mocking framework, and Python's pretty like I'm sure Ruby's the same, like it's pretty good for like wiggling around inside the guts of the interpreter and getting it to do different stuff. And like it would do some like I'm learning how to do these sorts of things as well, and it's just thrown it out there. Conscious of time, so just before we go, in terms of Typesense, what's coming up next for 2025?
So for us, the big thing, I mentioned this before, but it is this, we're calling it natural language search, just like how we've had conversational search, and then we have geo search and full text search and image search and all these. So along those lines, we're calling it natural language search, which is essentially having an LLM pre-process user queries and then convert them into more structured Typesense queries. So almost like text to SQL, it's text to Typesense queries built inside of Typesense. So I'm super excited about that. I think it's going to open up a wide variety of use cases for retrieval. And then after a lot of experimentation, we've been like finally found a nice use case for MCP, which I think is actually useful outside of all the hype that went through. And we're basically working on like a toolkit for Typesense developers to then build their own MCP servers on top. That interact with like the Typesense data set under the hood, which I think could be, again, these are like fundamental things that can open up broader use cases.
Especially because I would expect search engine results must be one of the most common like RAG bits of data that you would want, right?
Exactly. Like typically, for an LLM to respond, it has to do some form of search, whether it's like grepping or doing web research. So what we're now thinking is that essentially adding Typesense as a different way to do search on a data set that you might have indexed in Typesense just opens up more possibilities for you and your users, as well. So yeah, I would say these are two big, buckets of work. Besides, all the other things, which is like, people are still asking us for all these features that exist, or enhancements on the features that exist, as they use it and give us feedback, and as we round out these features, that's business as usual. We have to get to them, and more marketing. As well. It's,
you've not got a Super Bowl ad coming up.
no, not. That'd be cool though.
Maybe cool. 2026, right?
Yep. Once everyone realizes the importance of search and it's everywhere, and we're like, okay, hey, use Typesense for search and Super Bowl ads. That'd be cool.
All right, well, Jason, as usual, third time I've said this. Been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you, and good luck for the rest of the year. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Yeah, it was great catching up, and thank you for having me.